Reese had filled me in on how he'd been eavesdropping on Julia so I could avoid crossing paths with him. Then I headed off to class. So Julia's really diving into witchcraft now, huh? This could get interesting. But then, the reality hit me. The fool's cap. Julia was the one who cursed me with it, so it only made sense that she be the one to lift it. After all, being the target of ridicule and scorn instead of dishing it out might be good for her, and it'd definitely make my life easier. The catch, of course, was that I can't just take the fool's cap off and slap it on her. According to the rule of intent, trying to force it onto her would just send it back to me. In fact, that's probably how it ended up stuck on me in the first place, thanks to Julia. But, if Julia tries to screw me over with some fake spell, even if it's bogus, then I'm not in the wrong. She'll end up grabbing the fool's cap by mistake. She thinks it's just an old superstition. She's in for a big surprise. Now, I just need to figure out how to convince Julia that I have something she wants, something she thinks she can take with magic, without lying. I'm too close to getting rid of this fool's cap to mess it up with a lie. By the end of the school day, I pulled off a small victory. I managed to get my hands on their stupid paperback on Witchcraft. I flipped through it, memorizing the pages they'd underlined. I made a quick pentagram in lemon juice on the back cover and planned to give it back to them with the old "did anyone drop this?" trick. Not that they were grateful. After school, I managed to ditch Cole and his gang. You'd think they'd get the hint by now, and biked into town. One thing about living in a college town, there's no shortage of bookstores. It took some digging, but I found a copy of The Well-Nice Stranger, Secrets of Appalachian Folk Witchcraft. The stuff people will buy, seriously. Julia must not have believed this nonsense before, but after what happened with the phantasm, I'm guessing she's a little more skeptical than most of the Harry Potter wannabes. I was sitting at the soda Fontainebleau, all dressed up, trying to remember the passages they'd underlined in that book, when Paris and Della showed up. "What's this?" Paris asked, eyeing the paperback. "This?" After Friday night, I thought it'd be good to know what kind of tricks Julia might have up her sleeve. "You take this seriously?" she asked, clearly skeptical. I snorted. "Are you kidding? It's fine for party tricks, but for anything real, forget it." "But what happened Friday?" she pressed. "Hey, you heard Rebecca, right? Mass hypnosis and all that." "Ethan, it wasn't mass hypnosis or anything like that." "What do you mean?" "Ethan, ever since that thing came after me, stuff's been moving around." "You've actually seen things move?" "Well, no, but..." "Then how do you know it's not just your imagination?" "I mean, this is exactly what Julia was trying to pull on you." Della jumped in, "Honest, Ethan, she's not making this up. She's lost things all weekend and today, put something down, look away, and when she looks back, it's gone or hidden under something." I gave her a long look. "Okay, so what do you want me to do about it?" "This?" I held up the paperback. "This is just stuff for chumps. If you want it, take it." Paris studied me for a moment. "Ethan, you chased that thing away when it came at me." "That? Please, that was nothing." I knew Julia was messing with us, so I did the first thing that came to my mind to snap everyone out of it. "No big deal." "Then how did you know to use salt against it?" "That? Oh, I saw it in a movie, Hocus Pocus. You know, with Bette Midler and Sarah Jessica Parker. The heroine used salt to hold off the witches." It just popped into my head. "Ethan, would you help me out? Do a charm from the book or something, and get this off my back? Daddy thinks I'm acting out, and if this keeps up, he'll send me to a child psychologist." "A kid shrink?" "Ugh." Della gently touched my hand. "Ethan, you have to do this. Even if it's all in our heads, maybe performing the right rituals will get this out of our system. And if something real is going on, well, you managed to get rid of it once before." I didn't really believe it, but I decided to go along. To be sure, I casually scanned Paris with my good eye, and my jaw nearly hit the floor. Perched on her right shoulder, invisible to the untrained eye, was a small bird of ill omen, or a jinx bird, as they're called. A nasty kind of goblin that causes trouble when you least expect it. I quickly masked my surprise and started flipping through the paperback for something useful. After a moment, I found something that wouldn't work on its own, but would be perfect to get rid of the bird. An hour and a half later, we were standing at the intersection of Fletcher's Lane and Shearer's Road. Paris stood in a circle of salt, holding a candle and reciting as much of the 22nd Psalm as she could remember. At her feet, a small pile of bay leaves was burning. While Paris and Della were busy with that, I locked eyes with the bird of ill omen and told it to scram. It did, and Paris sighed in relief. Phew! It feels like a huge weight has been lifted off my shoulders. She gave me a big hug. After that, I had to leave. I still had to help with dinner. The next day at school, the bitch pack seemed oddly pleased with themselves. I exchanged a confused glance with Reese, but he looked just as clueless as I was. Julia must have done something particularly nasty, but until I could sift through the eavesdropping spell I'd cast, I had no idea what. Still, it gave me time to think about how to repay Julia for the gift she'd given me a few months ago. The best solution? Have Julia try to steal something magical from me, so the rule of intent would make her end up with the fool's cap instead. The problem was, I couldn't figure out how to make her believe that I had something she wanted without lying or dropping hints about the coven. Later that day, as I was biking into town, Mrs. Cosgrove, who's also part of the coven, stopped me. She was sharp and a powerful witch herself. Dan Winters. I need to talk to you. I stopped, and she led me to a clump of trees. Dan, I've found something disturbing. I had to fight back a nervous sweat and flashed her a blank smile. Honestly, Mrs. Cosgrove, neither of my brothers would ever pick elderberries in your backyard. I knew better than to mess with her dog, the biggest in Millbridge. She waved my comment off. It's not that. I was out by Fletcher's Lane and spotted what looks like a crude ritual. Now, you know how people get when they hear that kids are fooling around with the black arts. Have you heard anything? I briefly considered sending her after Julia and her crew, but I needed Julia to stay in her Wicked Witch of Millbridge role for a while longer. Plus, Mrs. Cosgrove wasn't someone you could fool easily. Well, none of the boys I hang out with are messing with that stuff. At least, none that are from the families. They'd know better than to leave signs lying around. She corrected my grammar before walking away, believing that girls my age wouldn't drag their boyfriends into occult nonsense until high school or college. Once at the library, I changed and wandered around. I eventually ran into Jazz, and we started window shopping. The walk and talk was fun, especially because Jazz's quirky mind kept things interesting. As we were looking at clothes, Paris and Della showed up, and we made it a foursome. After hanging out for a bit, Della managed to get Jazz alone. Paris's mood shifted immediately. That bitch did it to me again. Wait, what happened? Julia Dunaway. Paris shouted, her voice full of anger. She's the one who put that jinx on me. She did it again. She pulled a slip of paper from her purse and held it up for me to see. The runes scrawled on it were crude, like something a child would scribble, trying to copy a sign they saw once. Without thinking, I quickly checked Paris' right shoulder with my good eye. Sure enough, the bird of ill omen was back, and this time, it was bigger and nastier than before. It shot me a cold, challenging look, daring me to try to banish it again. No way. This thing was far too big for me to handle alone. I quickly reached into my backpack and pulled out my book, flipping through it as though I was looking for a solution. As I did, I secretly palmed a dime and placed both hands on Paris' shoulders, staring her in the eye. All right, Paris. Time to stop messing around. You need to go to the big boys now. First, you have to turn the hex back on the one who cast it. What? Did you ever see The Curse of the Demon with Dana Andrews? I asked. Julia stuck you with this hex by slipping you this paper. You've got to turn it back on her by getting it back to her without her realizing it until it's too late. How do I do that? Paris asked, sounding rattled, definitely not like herself. Why not get Lex to do it? She'll probably expect you to. I can't do that. Paris hissed, nearly panicking. Why not? Lex is freaked out by witchcraft, voodoo, all that stuff. He thinks it's tied to slavery and has an uncle who's obsessed with it. He's so embarrassed by it, he'd freak if he even knew I was involved. Great. It has to be someone really close to you. What about Della? Well, she's your best friend. Paris eagerly nodded. So, after Della hands the paper back to Julia, go straight to St. Anne's Church on Highland. Ask Father Conroy to do a mass for you. Even though it might be too late for the regular Wednesday afternoon mass, I'm sure he'll do it if he thinks it'll put your mind at ease. But I'm not Catholic. It doesn't matter. The Catholic Church is known for handling things like this. From what I understand, part of the mass frees you from anything except the power of God. A priest told me about it once at the Unitarian Church. It should work. Paris turned to go find Della and head off to find Julia. As she did, the dime I'd slipped onto her shoulder fell off. It wasn't silver or cold iron, but it would have to do. The dime had short-circuited the link between Paris and the bird of ill omen. It was still there, hovering above her, but without that link, it couldn't harm her anymore. I kicked the dime down a sewer grating and returned to hanging out with Jazz. I finally figured out how to get back at Julia. During a break between classes, I managed to corner Reese. You still up for dealing with Julia Dunaway? Am I? Reese smirked, looking relieved. I thought you were gonna back out. No chance. I need you to get that paperback book they're always flipping through. Why? I've seen more meaningful books that start with C-Spot Run. I grinned, pulled out my copy of the book, and showed it to him. Reese raised an eyebrow in understanding. I used the rule of similarity to spell it up, so it's got all the right marks, underlined passages, dog-eared corners, everything. With one little addition. I turned to the dedication page and ran a glamour through the lemon juice runes I'd written there. It's a variation on the hex I laid on you. My price for giving her this book is that she promises not to use any harmful magic. Reese's grin grew even wider. That's classic. Since Julia doesn't have a clue about how magic really works, she'll break her word at the first opportunity. You get rid of the fool's cap, get back at Julia, and she ends up with it instead. But, if everyone still thinks the fool's cap is on your head. I've got it covered, Reese said with a smirk. Mrs. Cosgrove's keeping an eye out for kids practicing black magic. You know, the usual nothing weird happening in Millbridge routine. So, if Mrs. Cosgrove happens to catch the bitch pack doing their bubble, toil and trouble act. Can I do it? Can I do it? I interrupted eagerly. Sure, just make sure Mrs. Cosgrove doesn't stop them before they break their word and that everyone hears about it. In vivid detail. If that doesn't glue the fool's cap onto Julia's head, nothing will. After third period, Reese brushed past me in the hallway. Got it. I put it in the lost and found. Good man, I replied. I headed off in search of the bitch pack. I found them huddled around Gail Edgerton's locker, digging through it. I cleared my throat loudly. Ladies? Looking for something? I held up the book and gave them a wicked grin. Julia shot daggers at me with her eyes. That's mine. Give it here, dork. Really? I don't see your name on it anywhere. You stole it. Give it back, or I'll. You'll do what? Cast a spell on me? I waved the book at them, the one they thought was essential for their witchcraft. Or maybe call Ms. Sorensen and ask her to get your book of black magic back? Remember, Sorensen confiscated my comic books. What do you think she'd do if she knew you were reading about the dark arts in class? The other girls started to look uncomfortable, but Julia wasn't backing down. Normally, I'd respect that in someone who wasn't a complete jerk. Oh, and if you were planning to get your boyfriend of the week to get it back, I said, pretending to rip the book apart by the covers, don't bother. No. No. Okay, Dan, you win. What do you want? I smiled in victory. Not much. I understand you've been casting spells. All I want in return for this book is a solemn oath that you won't cast any more harmful spells, especially on me, my family, or my friends. Julia gave me a smile, one of those fake, condescending blonde smiles that makes other blondes look bad. I could tell I'd just dropped from dork to complete moron in her eyes. Of course. We would never. Let's make it official, Dunaway. I flipped through the book and guided her through an oath, invoking the rivers, binding her to never perform any ritual with harmful intent that would affect me, my family, or my friends. Julia went through the motions, her smile still plastered on her face, though I could tell she was plotting her next move. When she finished the oath, I handed her the book, and I felt the hex lock into place. As I walked away, I heard a giggle from behind me and a quiet dork. Reese was waiting for me with a Cheshire cat grin. We did the fist bump and I asked, "Is your eavesdropping spell still up and running?" He nodded smugly, then concentrated. Let's see. Nasty comments, snide remarks, oh, they don't even realize how close they are with that one. Ah, here it is. Julia just told her crew they're going to take down Paris Lancaster first, then really make your life miserable. Ugh, talk about coals to Newcastle. When are they planning to do this? Tonight's no good, but tomorrow, around 9, out in Cooperswood by the old spooky oak. I snickered. The place was creepy looking, but it had zero magical power, perfect for Julia's clueless witchcraft attempts. So, Reese, want to sick Mrs. Cosgrove on them? You're too good to me, he said before heading off to his next class. He'd love it if this worked out. Not only would he get his revenge on Julia, but if she ended up with the fool's cap, it would mean he could get away with anything he wanted without triggering the hex I'd placed on him. Plus, he knew about my other life. I might let him in on a little secret. This hex I just laid on Julia is an extension of the one I put on him. If he does anything to me, he'll take the fool's cap right off her head and put it on his own. Yeah, I'll tell him, after he gets Mrs. Cosgrove on the bitch pack. After school, I met up with Griff and his crew. Paris was in a good mood after her session with Father Conroy, and for the first time in a week, Trevor was actually there. But, of course, Jazz was nowhere to be found. Typical, right? By the time I finally managed to get these two in the same room, she'll probably be off dating someone else. While we were all chatting, Paris raised her hand for attention. Hey, guys, what's everyone doing Friday night? A chorus of not much murmured around the table. All right, then, come over to my place. My parents are out, and they said I could have a few friends over. Another party? Someone teased. Didn't you just have one? No, not a party, Paris replied. Just a few people hanging out, popcorn, movies, nothing major. But you have to be out by 10. I figured Mr. Lancaster was playing his usual game of controlled liberty. By letting Paris have a small, selected group over, he could be sure things wouldn't spiral into a full-on party. He probably does this all the time, lets Paris think she's getting a bit of freedom, but with enough structure to avoid anything too wild. I asked Paris if I could invite Jazz, and after a brief glance at Lex and Trevor, she nodded. During a trip to the powder room, I asked Paris if she had any trouble with the bitch pack. Nah. I ran into Rita Hewitt, but I made sure to clear myself right after. She couldn't put anything on me. Still, Rita could have pulled the old get a couple of hair strands trick, I pointed out. But I wouldn't worry too much. According to that book she's been using, you can only try to hex the same person 3 times. At the party, then the circle of salt, and now with that paper she slipped you, that's 3. She's got to find someone else to bother. Paris seemed satisfied with that, happy to put her brush with the supernatural behind her. We moved on to the more important task of being 15-year-olds hanging out, nothing too complicated, just fun. Friday rolled around, and the undercurrents in school were palpable. Julia and her crew were whispering among themselves, Reese was casting smirks in their direction, and I was content to let everything play out on its own. I was so caught up that I ran into the Peslo swarm, but luckily it was just between classes, so all they had time to do was stuff me in a locker. If there's one thing I've learned this year, it's how to get out of a locker. I finished my homework during study hall and went straight home after school to knock out some chores. After clearing my plans with Mom, she made a comment about how happy she was that my social life was picking up. Then, she asked Trey and Brett if they wanted to visit their friends, probably to enjoy some alone time with Dad. Once the chores were done, I grabbed a cute black turtleneck and red plaid miniskirt, something I'd been saving for a special occasion, and headed out. I cruised Old Town on my bike, hoping to run into Jazz, and of course, I did. "Jazz," I called. "St. Peter, is that you?" she teased. "Oh, get over it. I missed you by a mile. How much is SMERSH paying you to kill me?" "I'll double it." "Ha! You don't have enough money, bloated capitalist pig. Nobody double-crosses Smersh and lives to tell about it. How's about an orange raspberry mint delirium with crushed walnuts? Now you're talking, Yankee imperialist running dog. Lead on." After we dug in, I invited Jazz to Paris' place. She gave me a skeptical look. "So, what's the deal? Anything special planned?" "Sigh, okay, you got me. There's this cute guy, Trevor, who hangs out with us. He's really nice, but he's had 0 luck with girls. I thought it might be nice to get you 2 together. Plus, it would help smooth things over with Paris, she's worried about you making eyes at Lex." Jazz made a well, of course, sound at that last part, then eyed me with a calculating look. "So, this Trevor." "Trevor," I corrected. "Trevor, is he cute?" "Hell, yeah. A little quiet, but that's what happens when you're always the tag-along." "I know, I've been there. It's no fun." "Sorry, girl, but I don't do mercy dates." "It's not a mercy date. Just give him a chance," I urged. She pondered it for a moment. "All right. If he's there, I'll give him a shot. But if it doesn't work out, Paris doesn't have Lex's name written in stone or anything. Don't do this to me, Jazz. I really like you, and I don't want to have to choose between you and Paris. And Paris and Lex are great together. Relax, Blondie. I never said I was going to steal Paris's boyfriend. I just said if Trevor and I don't click, well, all's fair and all that." I sighed, long and exaggerated. "You know, Jazz, messing around with an ongoing romance is just bad karma." She snickered. "Bad karma? What, were your parents at Woodstock or something?" "Actually, I'm not sure." Jazz then called her parents to let them know she'd be late, and we went off to find Griff, Lex, Stu, or Trevor, anyone who could give us a boy's perspective for our movie choice. When we found Griff and Stu, the decision-making was chaotic. We wanted something romantic and comedic to cuddle to, but Griff and Stu insisted on renting Tomb Raider. Seriously? Tomb Raider? All it had was Angelina Jolie in a tight outfit, jumping around and shooting things. And I think I just shot myself in the foot there. We compromised on Kiss of the Dragon, which had action and explosions, but at least Jet Li was there for us girls. When we arrived at Paris's place, Lex was already there with a copy of Tomb Raider. It was like a conspiracy. Thankfully, Paris had a copy of Scary Movie, so we could hold off on Angelina for a bit. I asked Lex, "Where's Trevor?" "I thought he said he was coming." Lex shrugged. "He called and cancelled. Said something about a last-minute family thing." Great. We spent the next bit arguing over the pizza order, but at least Jazz had enough class not to make a move on the hostess's boyfriend while we were watching the movie. When the pizza arrived, I went to the door to pay, but as I opened it, something brushed past me. It wasn't the wind. With my witch instincts, I felt it drift up the stairs, invisible to everyone else. I paid the pizza guy, took the pizza into the living room, and announced, "I'm going to make some herbal tea. Anyone want some?" I got a few Coke, please requests and headed into the kitchen. "Why tea?" "Well, you know the old gypsy scam of reading tea leaves? It's not all a scam. Water is sensitive to the flow of glamour, and tea leaves can reveal things like the presence of spirits. Luckily for me, Paris's mom prefers loose tea, not bagged. After delivering the Cokes, I boiled some water and soaked the leaves. The leaves confirmed what I already feared, the bird of ill omen was back, and it was bigger and nastier than before. It was angrier too. The last time it had been a minor nuisance, but now it was far more powerful. The first time, I had just shooed it away. The second time, I needed Paris to go to mass to get rid of it. But now, it was so powerful that even someone like me couldn't take care of it alone. Maybe a full-fledged witch like my mom could, but not me. Then it hit me. The rule of 3, each time a spell is attempted, it grows stronger. And the bird had been allowed to grow strong enough to harm Paris, all because of me. I'd let it in the house. I had to calm myself. Don't fight it, Winters. Send it somewhere else. But sending it away would only make it come back stronger, unless I sent it after someone who could handle it. Who? If only I could direct it toward Julia and her crew. Maybe I could use the Fool's Cap to help. The Fool's Cap. If I could find out what the bird of ill omen was focused on, I could use the link between the bird and Paris to transfer it onto Julia. The bird might not care if it knew, and it would probably go for the easier target. But it would be risky. I'd save Paris, but the bird might tear me apart in the process. No, wait. I looked at the clock. It was just past 9. Julia and her coven were probably getting started. I used the Fool's Cap and felt a ripple of tension. They hadn't broken their word yet, but they were gearing up to. Perfect. Not only would Julia get the Fool's Cap, but she'd also get the bird's wrath, probably thinking it was some curse from the demon she conjured. This would freak her out. But then it hit me. Oh shit. I can't send both the Fool's Cap and the bird at the same time. The parameters of my enchantment won't allow for it. I could tie the link between Paris and the bird into the Fool's Cap, but that would only send either the cap or the bird. If I sent the cap, I'd still have to deal with the bird. Or, I could just sit back and let Julia deal with it, forcing her to take the cap and letting Paris fend off the huge, evil bird alone. Like hell. Paris is my friend. I don't do things like that to my friends, especially when I'm responsible for so much of the mess. I grabbed a salt shaker and an iron knife and made my way up the back stairs to Paris's room. I opened the door and flicked on the light. Paris's room was your typical girl's space: pastels, stuffed animals, posters, a ruffled 4-poster bed. Normally, it was cozy, but with the light on, something about it felt darker now. The cause of the darkness was perched on the backboard of Paris's bed. The bird of ill omen. The first time I'd seen it, it was the size of a finch. The second time, it was the size of a raven. But now? It was the size of a California condor, and looked like a buzzard gone rogue. It glared at me as though I were trying to take away its meal. And, well, I kind of was. Wait. What the hell was it doing here? Why wasn't it perched on Paris's shoulder like before? Was there something connecting this thing to her? And where the hell had it come from? Maybe Julia has more magical talent than she lets on. Nah, if she did, she'd never keep it hidden. Maybe Paris had some talent of her own, unknowingly drawing this trouble to herself. Or maybe it was something about the bed. I reached under the bed, and that's when the birds started to freak out. Quickly, I formed a circle of salt and etched another with the knife, just in case. The bird didn't want me messing around under the bed. That felt like an invitation to dig deeper. I grabbed an umbrella hanging from the dresser and, staying safely inside my salt circle, poked it under the bed. I pulled out the stupid doll, the Barbie doll, wrapped in the gauzy scarf and black cord. The one I used to summon that phantasm to scare Julia. Somehow, that damn bird latched onto the doll and used it to reconnect with Paris. I was responsible for all of this. With the umbrella, I fished the doll out, and the bird went ballistic. I untied the black cord, unraveling the spell's energy, which left the bird of ill omen with only one prey, me. It spread its wings and dove straight at me, screeching as it battered at the salt circle, tearing at the weak defenses I'd hastily thrown up. The bird wasn't backing off. It was after me, and it would stop at nothing to get to me. I could feel it weaving its link to the fool's cap, using it to worm its way around the circle. The bird was coming for my very soul. I held the iron knife in front of me, thinking that maybe, just maybe, stabbing it in the center would disrupt its flow of glamour. Then I felt a strange tug at my head. For a moment, the heavy weight I'd been carrying around lifted. I was free. But then it came crashing back, and the bird was yanked out of the room like it was on a rope. I heard the front door slam shut and Stu's voice. What was that? Julia. Julia Dunaway had saved me. She'd cast some absurd spell from that ridiculous book of hers, and it triggered the enchantment. Instead of pulling the fool's cap off my head, it yanked the bird of ill omen and sent it after Julia. But I wasn't worried about Julia. Reese probably had Mrs. Cosgrove with her by now, dealing with the bird. I placed the Barbie back on the dresser, swept up the salt with a clothes brush, and cleaned up my tracks. Paris would never know I'd been there. I walked downstairs, grabbed my herbal tea, and rejoined the group just in time to watch the killer do something ridiculous in Scary Movie. I nestled up to Griff for comfort. I needed someone to be strong for me. I couldn't shake the chill. Griff turned to me, noticing my unease. Hey, Ethan, what's wrong? You know, creepy stuff like this doesn't happen in real life. Monday at school, Reese approached me. What happened Friday night? What did you send after her? It's complicated, I said. Things got out of hand and I had to improvise. Did Mrs. Cosgrove handle it? Yeah, he said, looking impressed. I didn't know she had those kinds of tricks. Did you know? He mimed taking off an invisible crown. Nope. Shit. He was just mad that he still couldn't mess with me. As for me, I was done with payback for a while. If I hadn't been so focused on getting back at Julia, I never would have put Paris, or myself, in the bird's path. Julia, Cole, Ms. Sorensen, Coach Robbins, they weren't worth the trouble of trying to get back at. Plus, what good would it really do? People like Cole just want to get even, and the cycle never ends. But, at least, I had the satisfaction of knowing Julia would be looking over her shoulder for weeks, afraid of the bird and the fool's cap.